it just somehow like got the hair to stand up on the back of my neck, in ways it hadn't in the past 20 years. And I just felt compelled to do something. And I'll say anyone can, literally any citizen in the United States can really stand up and speak and make a change. And I know it often doesn't feel that way. And I know we're at a difficult time with that, but that still, at least was then, a beautiful thing.
Welcome to Practical Politics, the podcast that takes you inside the room where decisions actually happen. I'm Sabrina Noah, the lobbyist lady, bringing you conversations with the people who live and breathe politics and policymaking process. What happens when the patient becomes the advocate? Today, we chat with one of the first attorneys specializing in cannabis, Eric Berlin. Eric left a prestigious, big law career after personal battles with Crohn's disease and later leukemia. He transformed his personal journey by playing a key role in crafting landmark cannabis legislation in Illinois and Ohio, and now leads the cannabis practice at one of the world's largest law firms, Denton's, advocating for safe, legal, and affordable access. Welcome, Eric.
Nice to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thank you for being here today.
I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you. It's fun to speak to folks who know the industry, someone like you who knows it as well as you do. And I'm honored that you have me on.
You can't start a cannabis journey without talking about your cannabis origin story. It's kind of how we welcome you to the sesh and to the table. So Eric Berlin, would you share with us your cannabis origin story?
I'd be happy to, Sabrina. And you sent me a note in advance that mentioned how personal experience can drive meaningful policy change. And I thought to myself, my goodness, I guess that did happen. And so I'm happy to speak about that. I'm going to go a little deeper than I normally do, if that's okay. I think that's sort of the purpose.
It's appreciated.
Yeah. So I was not afraid of marijuana in high school or college, but I was not a free the weed guy. I mean, I came to my legalization efforts primarily through the medical side. And so just to put things in perspective for your audience, I graduated law school in 1993. I went to one law firm called Wildman Harold and then on to Jones Day, which is a large, prestigious law firm in the United States and internationally. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And so I assumed almost in high school that I would become a lawyer. And I wanted to be a litigator. I had some uncertainty as to whether I'd be able to be a litigator because I have Crohn's disease. And that is actually linked into this story. Crohn's disease affects the gastrointestinal system. It's an autoimmune disease where the body perceives it's something that can be perhaps benign, but kind of overtax it. And that's kind of the nature of autoimmune diseases, but it makes it that you sometimes have to be hospitalized, sometimes have surgery. In the more benign state, just have to go to the bathroom a lot. Sometimes have days where you are like have the flu and you're out for a day, but you can bounce back pretty quickly, or sometimes you don't. I had surgery when I was in high school and have generally been pretty healthy along the scale of things. And I had a long period of time where I wasn't on medication or anything like that. In 2006, I came out of remission significantly. And so at the time, I was a partner at Jones Day, working on large bet the company cases. Antitrust matters, healthcare matters, False Claims Act matters, things like that, often cases with the threat of treble damages. And folks wanted a really good litigation team at that firm. And so those are the kind of things I was working on. I mentioned I had concerns about being a litigator because it's a tough lifestyle. Litigation in big law, it's very demanding. And I was an actual stand-up litigator, so I would go to court and have to appear at depositions and stuff like that. And I always
sounds
had
very
concerns.
physical. I never realized it was such a physical job.
Yeah, and whether my gut would hold out. And it did. I mean, it did for decades, Roy. It did decades. And in '06, I came out of remission and I went to my sort of more local doctor who started treating me and at a certain point said, I need to send you to the specialist. And this is the time when the biologics were coming out.
Hmm.
And it was like Remicade was the first
Remicade.
one. People may
Yeah.
remember that.
Yeah.
And
I worked on the launch of Remicade with the Partnership for Prescription Assistance. That's why I have
that's
the orange
amazing.
bus. I
Oh,
literally did huge bus tours trying to get Remicade out into the Crohn's community because it was like an $18,000 infusion medication, life changing, but very, very costly. And so I enrolled people to try to get them access to that medication through Partnership for Prescription Assistance.
well, for reasons I don't understand, and maybe no one ever will, these sorts of things,
Mm.
Remicade didn't really work for me, and
Wow.
Humira did. So Humira is an injection as opposed to an infusion. But
Yeah.
anyway, I was I was pretty sick, and also working in that environment. I mean, you need to be on top of your game, and it became difficult. I um, had to work from home more, which, this is pre-COVID and we didn't do it. So, I was really struggling.
Challenging.
I eventually went down to University of Chicago. There are really great experts there at the University of Chicago, including David Rubin, who is one of just truly internationally known for inflammatory bowel disease. So this is right around, we're thinking '07, '08. In 2008, I read an article in the Chicago Tribune, of all places.
Yeah.
And the article was about what was happening in California and medical cannabis. And
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I'd been to California a whole bunch of times to take depositions and other things, and it didn't really hit my radar. It just wasn't like, I mean, I knew Californians were generally okay with weed, right? But I mean, for a long time, but like that just wasn't really on my radar. And so I read an article in that Tribune article, which had two theses basically, as I recall them. One was, and this will make you laugh because it remains the same, California is the Wild West. Um, and there
Yeah.
was really some, it was, this goes on to inform the story because that perception
Yeah.
made it difficult to legalize in other places.
Yeah.
The second point was patients are getting real help by this.
Mhm.
And they, I think, included an interview with a Crohn's patient.
Mhm.
And this may sound very naive or quaint, but it was 2008, and I was like, huh? I mean, it sort of made sense to me because I was like, well, actually, thinking back when I smoked marijuana early in my life, my gut actually felt a little better. And
Right.
so, I mean, I didn't know, but
Yeah.
I was like, the Jones Day lawyer that I wasn't going to do anything until I really studied it and understood this. So I
Yeah.
started digging in at that point in 2008 into the three questions. Does cannabis have medicinal properties? Uh, is it safe? And the third, which I only proposed after the first two, is why is it illegal? So, in terms of just even in 2008, there was decent science indicating that cannabis had accepted medical value. And
Yeah.
I'm not using a specific standard there, but just that it was currently accepted in the treatment of some conditions in the
Yeah.
United States
There was
and
something.
elsewhere. There was
Yeah.
something there, and there are enough studies. My wife has a PhD in molecular biology, so she helped me interpret some of these studies. But I really
Oh,
studied
very
them, and
cool.
I didn't go to like just one of the advocacy group websites. I went to the original study. I really studied them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
after that, and I know we have a lot of discussion of how the science evolved and what got us to FDA recommendation to reschedule cannabis now, but I mean, there
Right.
was pretty good data out there that people were getting relief. And by that, I don't mean that it's curing diseases, but it was helping sequela of others, right? It was
Yeah.
if you were going through chemotherapy, it was helping with nausea.
Yeah.
Um,
An
if
appetite.
you, yeah, just appetite and things like that. So the next question I went on to is it safe?
Yeah.
And that was really eye opening. I mean, I certainly didn't believe the ads where, the egg is fried on the pan and that's your mind of one sip of marijuana, like I didn't
Another
believe that, but I
California
also assumed
political
like
expert.
yeah, I assumed there had to be some merit to what the government was telling
Yeah.
us. I mean, I
Hmm.
grew up in the 80s. That was just like the way we thought, right? And so that was really eye-opening because it even went back to administrative law judge Francis Young stating back in the 80s, late 80s, I believe the timing was, that marijuana is among the safer uh, drugs or controlled substances out there.
Yeah.
And I thought, how on earth did that happen, right? And I saw that the American Medical Association opposed
Yeah.
the prohibitions on marijuana. So and let me just say, in your podcast, I have for the last, for the first 15 of 17 years been so careful with my language and only use cannabis. I use
Yeah.
marijuana because at this point,
Yeah.
hemp has been distinguished. And so it
Heard.
actually is a legal term. And I don't mean any harm by it, but nor do I mean
Yeah.
any anything if I say weed or whatever. It just kind of we're beyond that now.
We
And I don't
are.
think we don't
There's a
have to
cultural
worry too
norm of
much about that. Yeah,
acceptance.
right. So that's just the explanation. But anyway, I read and I read about the safety. I read about the studies that were funded by the government to show that cannabis is harmful, that actually showed that it uh, was only not only much less harmful than smoking tobacco, but actually helped for heart mitigate and lung help mitigate some of the damage. So
Yeah.
not only was safe, but safer and efficacious, which led me then to, and this is not like a couple weekends of reading. This is months really dedicating myself to it. I mean, to the
Yeah.
extent I was working full time, I'd come home and plop myself down and keep reading about this. I mean, this is hours and hours and hours. So it was a combination for me, exactly, of it was kind of a perfect storm to gather my attention in terms of what I care about. It had patient access, and I really believe that uh, acutely, if we send soldiers into war, we ought to be able to give them whatever is going to help them, and so I have experience with chronic disease. And I, through that, have become acquaintances and even friends with other people who have Crohn's and multiple sclerosis and other things that really hold a human down. And really, when people are sick, they can't be themselves and they can't do the things that normal people do and want to do. And I feel like that's an injustice. And so the ability to try to address that and legalize medical cannabis was very attractive to me. The fact that it involved um, government waste, fraud, and corruption attracted to me because I was a long-time board member of the Better Government Association here in Chicago, like for over a decade. And that organization goes after here in Chicago, Illinois, and naturally waste, fraud, and corruption. And I mean, wow, is marijuana a good example of waste, fraud, and corruption in the government? The last part is just the racial injustice part. And those three,
Of course.
it just somehow like got that hair to stand up on the back of my neck, in
Yeah.
ways it hadn't in the past 20 years. And I just felt compelled to do something. And I'll say anyone can, literally any citizen in the United States can really stand up and speak and make a change. And I know it often doesn't feel that way. And I know we're at a difficult time with that, but that still, at least was then, a beautiful thing. And yes, I felt that as a lawyer, well, let me answer your question. So I wanted to do this, but I also, well, I'm going to say this. I felt it's a story of hubris in a sense that I thought once I gathered all these facts, it was so clear. I'd march down to Springfield, Illinois, explain it to them, and get the medical cannabis bill
It's so
passed.
simple that way
So
sometimes.
it is ridiculous. Just to set the table, as you asked, I am a partner at Jones Day. I don't know if I can sound a big time anything. I'm a chump, but I'm doing well in big law. And I, up until that point, um, was well respected for my litigation skills and my thoroughness and many of the things that I ported over into this industry. Went from this point of research to just asking people, and at that point, I had become part of the younger board for the University of Chicago GI Research Foundation. We just had our ball 2 weeks ago, and I remain on the board. And so I went to those folks, and I went to other folks as well who were kind of in the Crohn's community, if you will,
Yeah.
inflammatory bowel. I mean, not like it's a club, but you sort of get to know people, and not a club anyone should want to get into. But anyway, and I asked around, like, hey, what do you know about using marijuana to treat your Crohn's? And about half the folks looked at me surprised and said, aren't you? Like, it was so de rigueur in that population. And I asked
Interesting.
this stupid, like, middle-aged white guy questions, like, where do you get it? Like, seriously, like, I just didn't know. I had no idea. And I think
Wow.
that and even then I knew a lot more than most people would.
Yeah.
And that I felt that it was morally wrong that we were making patients with chronic diseases violate the law in order to get relief, make themselves criminals, bring themselves out of their own authenticity, have to become criminals to try to provide relief, and I should say, risk who knows what in
Yeah.
there, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
have those
Your
who
job,
have
your
auto
licenses, your
well,
kids,
no,
your
no. I mean,
homes.
literally, I mean all of
Yeah.
that, Sabrina,
And your
but I
life.
also mean your health, because these
Yeah.
are folks who have
Health.
autoinflammatory diseases. And all of a sudden, if there's something foreign or bad in there, it can be a lot more complicated. And
Yeah.
I really acutely felt that was wrong. I just felt that just tapped into something that got me more morally motivated than almost anything else in my life had. And that's the point where I where I had to then seek permission. Like, I made up my mind. I wanted to help. And I started to meet other patients, a ragtag group of patients. And I really thought, in my arrogance perhaps, that I could help. That I, as a skilled lawyer and someone who has persuasive skills, could go down to the Capitol and help them explain this. And I really
Because you've
wanted,
done it before.
yeah,
I
well,
think
I was
it's
thinking,
important. You've done it before. You're using those same skills,
same skills,
right?
right? Right.
You're
And
bringing
so
legitimacy.
that's a critical aspect. I looked better then, but I definitely was all suited up, no beard and all that stuff. And I think that was important. I mean, I had a lot of representatives say to me, like, haven't seen a cannabis lobbyist that looks like you, which is an all sorts of messed up thing to say. But putting that aside, I had it as like a 40 or 41-year-old had to have that conversation. Hey, mom and dad, I smoke pot. And I told them, and I think it was in reverse order. I think I first went to my managing partner at Jones Day, Chicago, who is a wonderful man named Dan Reed. Dan was a former U.S. attorney, I think, for the Northern
Mm.
District of Illinois. Let me go forward and do this pro bono. Dan's retired now, so he can no longer get fired for having let me do this. I wouldn't have said it while I was still working, but he let me do it pro bono. I went in, I said, Dan, I want to work pro bono. I explained it to him. I want to work pro bono to legalize medical cannabis in Illinois. And I won't quote him, but he was basically like, what on earth are you talking about? Right. It was just not like on anyone's radar right then. It was truly like not on anyone's radar. I mean, it was basically like me walking into the office and saying, oh, I want to legalize heroin. And I mean, not quite, but almost. And I convinced him to let me do it. He said, well, what does that mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, I'm going to vigorously work for my client, which are basically patients. No one's really my client, to try to have it so they have the right to use medical cannabis. Of course, I went on the news and wrote articles and things like that. But on the news, I inevitably it finally came up. Like finally, one of those times they said, "Well, do you? Right? Do you use medical cannabis?" I said, yes. And does it help? Yes, it helps. And I went back to the office and one of my partners, more joking, but said, good job getting the felony admission right out front. So, I mean, it's a different world, right? And there was a palpable fear that I was going to get in real trouble just through advocating. I was just advocating, but I was also, there was the felony admission involved at
Yeah.
times in the advocacy. And
Yeah.
I don't mean to speak for all of my partners. By the way, many of whom were supportive, but just in general, my colleagues at the time either were dismissive with laughter, dismissive, or supportive, but were basically like, that's great, but the stigma of this is going to stick to you forever. And we're concerned that you're basically giving up your career. Like you will not be able to shake this. They thought they were saying something bad. Little did I realize there was something good. But that was basically the attitude right then. But it was a time when, well, I talk about the elevator discussions. And at the
Yeah.
beginning of working on this, I truly could not, it would make someone uncomfortable if they're like, what are you working on? And I said, this is what I was working on. They're like, can I even be on the elevator with this guy? And then it moved to the point where you can't mention on the elevator because it's all people want to talk about. And I'm
Yes.
grateful for that evolution, but it was challenging. So I did, as I said, I had to go to my parents, and just to give you the context, my father was longtime counsel, also a lawyer, counsel to the New Jersey Republican Party. So not exactly like a great progressive, but not now actually. He's really had a change of heart and doesn't. So I want to make that clear. He's alive, 92, by the way. Um, and
Wow.
I will say that I don't think I've made my parents prouder than the work I've done working to legalize cannabis. They've been enormously supportive. Um, they have been really proud that I've spoken up, that I've used my powers to do that, that I'm speaking for people who may not have that voice or may not feel they have that voice, and writing something that I feel is wrong and that most people feel is wrong. So that conversation went just fine. My advocacy, to be clear, it's evolved over time, but
Yeah.
my advocacy at that time was, and it's still centered. It was centered and is centered
Always.
on safe, legal, affordable access. I just
Hmm.
mean it's gotten more complex in that there are a lot
Hmm.
more issues that are attached to it that I care about. But that point was just about safe, legal, affordable access to cannabis for those who would benefit from it. That
Absolutely.
was it. And I was just trying to think of what would help patients. And I'll tell you, Sabrina, even though I am leading, the big law cannabis group at the biggest firm in the world, it's still a question that I ask myself and pose to my colleagues,
Hmm.
like literally thinking about taking a case, good or bad, for safe, legal, affordable access for patients. Like, We have
Absolutely.
a fiduciary duty to make money for the firm, but we stick to that mission, and sticking to that mission has been successful for us. But when I started, that was it. And I can tell you, I can dispel any notion that I was like trying to create an industry. I had like at the time that I started, the notion that I would then go on to be a lawyer and service the industry and that would be fruitful was sort of folly. I mean, that
Totally.
didn't exist at the time. I mean, I keep a map of the greening of the United States, and the United
Hmm.
States was but for three states, gray.
Right.
And I knew that I believed that we would see a greening of the United States. It actually, in some ways, happened faster than I had hoped or anticipated. Not federal reform, but that part. Uh, and I just wanted that. And the situation in Illinois was that we don't have a viable ballot initiative like
Hmm.
California and other states that have legalized marijuana either through constitutional amendment or otherwise.
Hmm.
Illinois
Hmm.
just doesn't have a viable one. So we really had to do this in the legislature, which
Yeah.
creates, as you know, a whole host of other issues than going to the public. Putting a ballot initiative in front of the people is so much easier than going through the legislature. That alone seems to be somewhat of a misfire of democracy. But putting that to the side, we had to go through the legislature, our General Assembly here in Illinois. The southern third of Illinois is part of the Bible Belt.
Hmm.
And we have socially conservative representatives and senators from that part. And this goes back to the California part.
Yeah.
Uh, the image that so many of our elected officials and others had in their head was something that had run in the paper, maybe even in that article. Um, there too, there's the hippie with the dirty fingers smoking the joint, but
Yeah.
more often than not, it's the girl in the bikini under
Yes.
the neon pot leaf on Venice Beach giving out a free joint. And the notion that all of a sudden cannabis would be legalized in the state and they'd have girls in bikinis under neon lights handing out free joints in that place is ridiculous. Right.
Terrifying.
Well, I guess it was. I guess it was,
Right,
but
which is
it
why
struck me
folks
as
like you are so critical because you're coming in so professional with experience having done this before, reminding them that the world isn't going to end when they serve patients, right? Going back to your personal experience.
so. I will give you one of the main lessons that I learned that probably many of our listeners, if they're in the space, already know. But then I'll go to how it played out, which is I went to the Capitol with binders of information. Keep in mind, I started my work the year after the iPhone hit the market. So I'll concede compared to the iPhone, I'm doing horribly. Uh, and but there was no iPad or anything like that. I went literally with binders, like a trial
Hmm.
briefcase
I can
and
imagine with
binders
wheels.
of documents. And so I had an answer to everything. I war game
Hmm.
this like, and it's a game of pop-a-mole, as you know. So
Yeah,
any question, I could point to data. And I guess I kind of knew this, but had to relearn it, which is people aren't that moved by data. People move by stories and
by
how they
people.
feel and by people. And so getting back to the storytelling, if needed, supplemented by data. But the real storytelling, there are all sorts of people who participated in that at the Capitol. Well, I think of Jim Champion, who spent a lot of time going to Springfield, explaining his story as a Army Ranger, honorably discharged with multiple sclerosis, how he needed to use some marijuana to get from his bed into his wheelchair. And this is what the government wanted to deny him. And then in order to do that, because that was the only thing that worked, his wife went out into the illicit market to purchase for him.
Became a
And
criminal.
and right, and sort of just explaining it from that perspective. But this is another thing I learned is you have these management committees of law firms and elected officials we expect them to make data rationally based on data and their life's experience and all that sort of thing. And yet nothing moves anyone as much as like if their Aunt Helen used cannabis for her chemo and it went fine. Nothing. I mean, it's like, this is what I learned. I could go with data. I could go with, veterans, but that person in their life is so important. And it emphasizes the issue of trust in all these decisions that are made. And I'm not saying that, I say that partially dismissively because I do think people should be able to get their arms around data, but only a little bit. I mean, this is reality of this is how we make decisions, and we all ought to honor that. And in terms of my work down there, I I I I never dismissed any question. I took them one by one and tried to answer them as honestly and as, if needed, thoroughly as I could. I was very
Incredible.
conscious. I was very conscious of how I was presenting. I generally am, but like there, I was absolutely fully suited. Very much all in on the game, knowing that I'd have a few minutes to build all of that, which is impossible to do within that period of time. Trust, credibility, the willingness to persuade. And it doesn't only take once, but it can take once to not be invited back. And so it's really critical to consider not just the story that you want to tell, but how that story is going to be perceived. And I just think it's really important to think about how are these folks perceiving it? How are they talking to one another? Selecting whom you're talking to. It's all very strategic. And it really is also just about grinding it out, like many things in life. Just showing up and doing this day in and day
And doing
out.
the work.
Yeah, and doing the work, right. And so
Would you agree it's also about authenticity? Because I think that's also a key theme going back to the beginning, right? Doing the work, doing the homework. Those are all things that are those core principles of any practice. But what I think is unique about people and some of what I like our listeners to experience is what makes a difference is your authentic connection to the material. Because you can be organized and presentable and strategic and all of those things. But one of my homework assignments was I interviewed several of our mutual friends in the industry,
wow.
and and he said, ask Eric what makes him the nicest guy in the industry. And the answer, and he said that was going to be your reaction, your giggle and smile. And the answer is, I think, because you're authentically kind and you're authentically committed to the plant. It's so easy to know where you stand. I feel the same way. It's, are you going to help access the plant or not? That's the only condition to be at the table. But your story is so powerful because it's so personal. Like, do you think authenticity is important?
It's
All of the
enormously
homework
important.
aside.
Yeah. So I appreciate all of that. I'm sorry I laughed and giggled, but I think authenticity is important. And I think kindness is important. And so, as to the first, authenticity, what does that mean? Like, I got the case. Like, what are people connecting to? And the reason I did the deep dive is so that I could help my colleagues get there as well, right? Like, what is
Yeah.
it that people are connecting to? Why is this working? And how can other people replicate it? And so I definitely think I still am fully authentic on this. I mean, it fits me. This suit fits me perfectly and it's fine. But I think a lot of it is the sense of caring, whether they're on the lobbying side or patient access or business side. They understand I care a lot about this and
Yeah.
that I'm dedicating my time really authentically to it, but I really care about it. And because I care about it, I'm going to care about their success because I don't just have to do the normal thing of like trying to care about them because they're a client and that's the right thing to do. I fully care because their success is part of my plan. And
Yeah.
so they're totally overlapping, and it's just safe, legal, affordable access. So the truth is, I'm happy to work with anyone who is working toward safe, legal, affordable access. I'm very grateful so many of them are willing to pay me and my group to do it as well. But I'm absolutely happy to do it. And as to the kindness, um, so I guess I should tell you another part of my story, which has us needing to I was involved throughout with Illinois in lobbying and became one of the lead folks, and I helped write the bill and help get it passed. And Governor Quinn invited me to the signing. It was all wonderful. Um, I later, or just a couple years after that, got called into Ohio to redraft the bill, which had been drafted in a way that made it
Mm.
fatally flawed, and to
Oh,
testify
interesting.
before the Senate committee and help get that passed. But I want to get back to, answer that question in an honest way, which is, uh, in the middle of all of this, I also got a diagnosis for leukemia,
Mm.
and indeed used cannabis for the chemo that I was dealing with to, get back recovered from that. And it was really at that point when it helped me there that I doubled down to committing my career to it. It was, and I thought to myself, holy cow, how thick do I need to be? I mean, like seriously, like as if I couldn't like determine that from the Crohn's and actually successfully getting bills passed and stuff like that. Like I actually needed to get like leukemia. It was at that point that I was like, this is I need to dedicate myself to this one way or another. For some reason, it all just clicked. I can't explain why, but for some reason, this was the thing that I was chosen to understand. Like it's hard for me to explain, but somehow like I could see and understand how the industry was going to unfold in real time. I'd done so much studying and had done
Mhm.
so much work in other industries, and I just didn't know it. I didn't know I'd be right. I just had a understanding of how it was going to how the industry was going to unfold and evolve to up to a certain point. Like I think we've reached my point right now, by the way. But
Was
but
there
I
one moment, like one meeting, like a governor called you? You were was there
so
one moment when you're like, I'm at the big kids table. I'm helping. I'm helping to save this
Yeah,
industry.
well, I think one meeting that sticks out like that, Sabrina, is a meeting that was truly like a closed door meeting. I believe at the Illinois Senate side. We've been taking a shot at this bill for several years, and this was the sit down of being like, this needs to get done. How are we going to get it done? And let's get down to like, this isn't going to look like California. It's not going to look like this. What's it going to be? And in that meeting was where numbers like how many cultivation centers we were going to have, how many dispensary licenses. Like in that, it's not the best
Yeah.
politics. As someone who worked for the BGA, not the greatest, but like you need to take it when you can get it. They didn't all love me at the meeting, I'll say. Right? I mean, there's some folks who are like, God, we trust this person. We love him. He's making it happen. I was a bit of a fly in the ointment, and I was sticking up for patients, and I wasn't going to bend. And I think I caused some friction at that meeting, but it was an important meeting. I went down for votes multiple times where the bill failed. I brought my daughter, who's now 28 and a public school teacher, who was then in middle school, to watch the vote that I was told it was going to happen. It was going to happen, and then it was voted down.
Oh,
She had to watch. She had to watch a Republican woman, representative, close the door in my face. Like my daughter was. It's you forget. You're like, oh, whatever. You go on your life, and she was like really upset with that.
was gonna say that had to
So,
be a big change moment.
I mean, in some ways, my story is common, right? You have someone who's sick. Every family has one usually.
Yeah.
Someone gets sick eventually. Someone who's sick, they can't get better as fast as you want, and they're trying to figure out how. And they take it in their own hands, and they see something that works, and they feel this is an injustice, and more people ought to be able to bail themselves of it. And yeah, I got it. And there's something that my brain just clicked, but I think anyone can help on these sorts of things. I was called into Ohio. Recall at that time, Ohio had just rejected a ballot initiative. It was not that the people of Ohio did not want medical cannabis. It was that the ballot initiative was drafted such that it, at least, were perceived to result in an oligopoly, where there were
Mm.
very few companies that would control the entire market. And people want medical cannabis, but they also are capitalists. And they
Yeah.
were offended by something that didn't appear that way, something worth remembering. And uh, I got an opportunity to go, and I'll tell you, I first called at Marijuana Policy Project, which was the sponsor, behind the scenes sponsor of the next ballot initiative coming up, and said, I'm not trying to kill your ballot initiative, but we have an opportunity to actually make progress on the bill. What do you want me to do? And they said, make progress on the bill.
Yeah.
And so the deal was the bill was drafted by a pharmacist who thought that medical marijuana was BS. And so he drafted it to not succeed and did not gather the votes for it to succeed. And same thing, spoke to enough patients that he had his mind changed. And he
Mm.
went to one of my clients in Ohio then and said more to let them know it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
To say, I know you have some interest in this, and it's not likely going to pass. It just doesn't have the votes, is the way it was put. And there may be some issues with how it was drafted, and we're just not going to get it done this session. And they offered me up, and I flew in and stayed at the the Marriott in Dublin,
Hmm.
and fixed the bill as well as I could. So I had to fix it up. I then went and testified before the Senate committee to explain my own experience and why I thought this was a good idea and what changes I'd made to the bill, and then talked to some of those folks. And lo and behold, we got the bill passed. I knowing your clients and that sort of thing. And it's a model that's done pretty well. And obviously, we now have many more firms who are involved. And same thing, by the way, for someone who wants safe, legal, affordable access and wants a national and global market.
And trying to figure out how to launch a new model, right? So I was involved in H 4309 and 4310, which were the medical authorizing bills in Michigan at the time. And we were looking at what you were doing. And I'm coming from the California experience. We were looking at what you're doing in Illinois and Ohio. And it was just so 180 the model, right? We were the barefoot, right? California, freewheeling caregiver programs.
Let me address that, if I may.
Please.
The bill that we ended up passing was the bill that was needed to get the job
That
done
could
in Illinois.
pass.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's the whole cold hard reality. And I will say, while I still full throatedly supported legalization of medical cannabis, I did not full throatedly support the bill that eventually passed. I had a
Yeah.
lot of problems with that bill, including fingerprinting patients.
Yeah.
That was just silly. And that bill was informed by the age of prohibition, right? I mean, I sometimes look at these like, the last arm of prohibition reaching up from the grave, but like,
Very true.
some of the ill-suited notions and stereotypes and stigmas were built into that bill, but it really it got medicine into a lot more people's hands. And as I said, I started wanting more of just a caregiver program. But let me
Yeah.
explain
Please.
why the model that we ended up with, and some people say, oh, it's corporate or whatever, is actually good because we've made cannabis retail operations. You can go
Yeah.
now, you can, if you live in Chicago or I live in Oak Park or anywhere around there, most likely you can walk or a really easy drive to a dispensary to purchase. And I know
Conveniently.
there are criticisms of dispensaries in terms of, they're not the most welcoming places, and I won't bash dispensaries, but I mean, if that's because of the law, that's because of the limitations on how they could look. But we're
Yeah.
getting there. I mean, this is part of a process,
It's
and
the
having
evolution.
it's an evolution, right? And it's an evolution even as to how people are willing to accept it, and people are far less willing to, legitimize an industry that's still weed in baggies versus something that is something more normalized for them. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying of getting this done in America 2025 or 2020 or 2030 or whatever, right? I mean, and by the way, hemp products have a role in this as well, right? I
Yes.
mean, the fact
Very
of
much.
the number of people who would like, I never try marijuana, but are willing to have a 5 milligram hemp drink
That they
and
order in the
enjoy
mail
it, and
off
right. And
Instagram.
so it's all part of this evolution. But in terms of if you're saying, well, I'm hardcore wanting safe, legal, affordable access within what we can accomplish, right? And during a period of time, proliferating access through retail and through delivery and having uh, labeling that shows exactly what's in there without getting into issues that have been around lab testing. But the law requires a label that shows you the top cannabinoids. Many will put the top terpenes. It empowers patients. Patients now know what's in there. They can when their doctor is worried about it, they can say no, no, no. It's tested for microbials and this and that. And I know all that is it's imperfect, but it's there. And I think that's a good thing for patients. And when I say patients, I now use that term pretty broadly. I don't mean just folks who are purchasing cannabis through the medical cannabis program. Uh, Quite frankly, I almost mean anyone who's using it to feel better. So, I mean, all of them deserve safe, legal, affordable access. And affordable, I know we can debate as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. And I appreciate you reflecting that we have gotten very far in 13 years that I've been in the industry.
And I thought at least part of my career clearly would be under full federal legalization. And I don't know, but I do know that I'm committed to this and that I will stay involved in one capacity or another. And there, two things I can say is there's some peace in that, knowing that every day you're going to lace up your boots for this cause. You don't really have to sit and debate it with yourself. It's like brushing your teeth. If you really feel that level of passion toward it, obviously there's some times that I'm like bummed out, but really I don't have a lot of problems getting up each day and lacing on my work boots and getting to work on this. And I intend to keep doing it. And the notion that it doesn't go at the pace we want, like, welcome to life. And we can all learn from that. I guess
I
is
love that.
what I have to say to that. Yeah. And then the other thing I just want to say is for folks listening, I know that I came from a big prestigious law firm. I'm well educated. I have training in how to present and all of that. But truly, I don't think that's needed. And I just said what really drives uh, our elected officials and regulators and others often are the stories. And everyone has a story to tell. And I think it's a really powerful way to share your story. And it can be frustrating if you want things to happen right away. But if you're willing to contribute to something, it's a really amazing way to have your voice heard. So I would just encourage anyone listening that if they feel passionate about something, to get involved. And I know sometimes it feels like, how do you do that? Or how can I be heard in all this? And holy cow, this guy said he's just dedicated the last 17 years of his life to this, and it probably is going to take another 20. Like, I mean, it takes hard work, but there's, there are good things in that as well. So I would just encourage anyone to get involved, and it doesn't have to be at the level that I'm involved. It doesn't have to be like, you're so fully committed. Everyone makes a contribution. And I think that having your voice heard is important, and particularly important for patients, like real patients who, whatever it is, anyone who comes from a segment where maybe the voices aren't heard as loud as they normally would be, it's on all of us to speak up, I think.
Absolutely. So you've gotten me to one of my final questions, which is, you started your advocate journey and you talked about the tools that were most helpful. You talked about your binders, right? That data-driven fact, but it was still that patient story. And then we moved to the next phase, right, for this next generation of cannabis advocates or political advocates, which is the professionalism, right, which is bringing a regulated marketing, treating it like a big kid, right? What does the future look like for the cannabis advocate? What is the future people who want to get involved, right? Authenticity seems to be the theme. We know the power of communications and media. What tools or things are you investing in this last chapter of your journey to be the best that you can be?
Well, I'll say for me, I'm investing a ton in information, right? I mean, I through my colleagues, and I've been studying this night and day and try to keep up, because I think knowledge is powerful, and it can be shared, and it's not just one skill that, you hold on to. So I think that's really what I'm investing in, is to continue to try to be, among the smarter or most knowledgeable people about the industry in the industry. But in terms of advancement, I don't want to underestimate anything. I mean, social media is critically important, but that's not what I'm an expert on, and not what I particularly do well. And so I would say, at the end of the day, as we lean into this age of professionalism, whether it's convincing a legislature to allow a trust to be among owners, or whether it's, adding a product category, or indeed going to state and starting anew and trying to pass it, I think that authenticity is really important. And by that, I mean, speak from your heart. And I know it's a vague term, but people know what I mean when I say it. And above all, be honest. Don't stretch the truth. Particularly on this issue, the truth is on our side. There's no need to, and it can do harm. But really just that, of like, check yourself before you go in, and remember to speak from your heart and speak directly to that person and tell the truth. And that is both immensely easy and immensely complicated. So
Well, thank you, Eric. Our listeners and I appreciate so much you joining us here today on Practical Politics to talk about your personal experience. And thank you. Thank you for everything you do on behalf of the plant and patients.
And I just want to say thank you for not just your time on this and letting me sit in and talk with you, but all of your amazing work. And, everything you do and you're pushing through is inspirational, and people should take inspiration from it. So I thank you for all that.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining me today on Practical Politics. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like and subscribe. Our next episode will be on the road at the Cannabis Regulators Stakeholder Conference in Denver, where we will interview Sabrina Fendrick, founder of the Normal Women's Alliance, who just released her memoir, Token Female. Until then, I'm Sabrina, your lobbyist lady, reminding you that every policy has a person behind it. Thanks for listening.